a WikiVidi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Olympic flame. The Olympic flame is a symbol used in the Olympic movement. Several months before the Olympic Games, the Olympic flame is lit at Olympia, Greece. This ceremony starts the Olympic torch relay, which formally ends with the lighting of the Olympic cauldron. During the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, the flame then continues to burn in the cauldron for the duration of the Games, until it is extinguished during the Olympic closing ceremony. Olympic flame. The Olympic flame is a symbol of the modern Olympic movement. Was introduced by architect Jan Wills, who designed the stadium for the 1928 Summer Olympics in Amsterdam. The idea for the Olympic flame was derived from ancient Greece, where a sacred fire was kept burning throughout the celebration of the ancient Olympics on the altar of the sanctuary of Hestia. In ancient Greek mythology, fire had divine connotations. It was thought to have been stolen from the gods by Prometheus. Sacred fires were present at many ancient Greek sanctuaries, including those at Olympia. Every 4 years, when Zeus was honored at the Olympic Games, additional fires were lit at his temple and that of his wife, Hera. The modern Olympic flame is ignited at the site where the Temple of Hera used to stand. When the tradition of an Olympic fire was reintroduced during the 1928 Summer Olympics, an employee of the electric utility of Amsterdam lit the first modern Olympic flame in the Marathon Tower of the Olympic Stadium in Amsterdam. The Olympic flame has been part of the Summer Olympics ever since. The Olympic flame was first introduced to the Winter Olympics at the 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Olympic torch relay. By contrast to the Olympic flame proper, the Olympic torch relay, which transports the flame from Olympia, Greece, to the various designated sites of the Games, had no ancient precedent and was introduced by Karl Diem at the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin, which were organized by the Nazis under the guidance of Joseph Goebbels. At the first Olympic torch relay, the flame was transported from Olympia to Berlin over 3,187 kilometers by 3,331 runners in 12 days and 11 nights. There were minor protests in Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia on the way, which were suppressed by the local security forces. Leni Riefenstahl later staged the torch relay for the 1938 film Olympia. Olympic flame lighting. The Olympic fire is ignited several months before the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games at the site of the ancient Olympics in Olympia, Greece. 11 women, representing the Vestal Virgins, perform a celebration at the Temple of Hera, in which the first torch of the Olympic torch relay is kindled by the light of the sun, its rays concentrated by a parabolic mirror. Olympic torch relay. After the ceremony at Olympia, the Olympic flame first travels around Greece, and is then transferred, during a ceremony in the Panathenaic Stadium in Athens, from the prior Olympic city to the current year's host city. The Olympic torch relay in the host country ends with the lighting of the Olympic cauldron. During the opening ceremony in the central host stadium of the Games, the final carrier is often kept unannounced until the last moment. Over the years, it has become a tradition to let famous athletes, former athletes or athletes with significant achievements and milestones be the last runner in the Olympic torch relay. Notable torch relays. The Olympic torch travels routes that symbolize human achievement. Although most of the time the torch with the Olympic flame is still carried by runners, it has been transported in many different ways. The fire traveled by boat in 1948 and 2012 to cross the English Channel and was carried by rowers in Canberra as well as by dragon boat in Hong Kong in 2008, and it was first transported by airplane in 1952, when the fire traveled to Helsinki. In 1956, all carriers in the torch relay to Stockholm, where the equestrian events were held instead of in Melbourne, traveled on horseback. Remarkable means of transportation were used in 1976, when the flame was transformed to a radio signal and transmitted from Europe to the New World. Heat sensors in Athens detected the flame. The signal was sent to Ottawa via satellite, where it was received and used to trigger a laser beam to relight the flame. The torch, but not the flame, was taken into space by astronauts in 1996, 2000 and 2013. In 2000, the torch was carried under the water by divers near the Great Barrier Reef. Other unique means of transportation include a Native American canoe, a camel, and Concorde. The torch has been carried across water. The 1968 Grenoble Winter Games was carried across the port of Marseille by a diver holding it aloft above the water. In 2000, an underwater flare was used by a diver across the Great Barrier Reef en route to the Sydney Games. In 2012 it was carried by boat across Bristol Harbour in the UK and on the front of a London Underground train to Wimbledon. In 2004, the first global torch relay was undertaken, a journey that lasted 78 days. The Olympic flame covered a distance of more than 78,000 kilometers in the hands of some 11,300 torchbearers, traveling to Africa and South America for the first time, visiting all previous Olympic cities and finally returning to Athens for the 2004 Summer Olympics. The 2008 Summer Olympics torch relay spanned all 6 inhabited continents before proceeding through China, but was met with protests in London, Paris, and San Francisco. As a result, in 2009, the International Olympic Committee announced that future torch relays could be held only within the country hosting the Olympics after the initial Greek leg. Although this rule took effect with the 2014 Winter Olympics, the organizers of the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver and the 2012 Summer Olympics in London chose to hold their torch relays only in their respective hosting countries of Canada and the United Kingdom. The London 2012 torch travelled 8,000 miles across the UK. The Rio 2016 torch travelled 12,000 miles across Brazil. Protests against relays. There have been protests against Olympic torch relays since they were first introduced. In 1936, there were minor protests against the torch relay to Nazi Germany in Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia, which was suppressed by the local security forces. In the 1956 Melbourne Games in Australia, local veterinary student Barry Larkin protested against the relay when he tricked onlookers by carrying a fake flame, consisting of a pair of underpants set on fire in a plum pudding can, attached to a chair leg. He successfully managed to hand over the fake flame to the Mayor of Sydney, Pat Hills, and escape without being noticed. In 2008 there were various attempts to stop the Olympic flame as a protest against China's human rights record. In London, a ring of steel was formed around the flame to protect it, but one protester managed to grab hold of the torch while it was being held by television presenter Connie Hook. In 2016, 10 days before the beginning of the Rio Games in Brazil, citizens of Angra dos Reis, a city near Rio de Janeiro, managed to put out the Olympic flame when protesting against the city spending money on hosting the Games, despite the economic crisis that took hold of Brazil. Reigniting the flame. It is not uncommon for the Olympic flame to be accidentally or deliberately extinguished during the course of the torch relay. To guard against this eventuality, multiple copies of the flame are transported with the relay or maintained in backup locations. When a torch goes out, it is relit from one of the backup sources. Thus, the fires contained in the torches and Olympic cauldrons all trace a common lineage back to the same Olympia lighting ceremony. The current design of the torch has a safeguard built into it. There are 2 flames inside the torch. There is a highly visible portion which burns cooler and is more prone to extinguish in wind and rain. But there is also a smaller, hotter flame akin to a pilot light hidden inside the torch which is protected from wind and rain, and is capable of relighting the cooler, more visible portion if it is extinguished. The fuel inside the torch lasts for approximately 15 minutes before the flame is exhausted. Olympic cauldron lighting. During the opening ceremony, final bearer of the torch runs towards the cauldron, often placed at the top of a grand staircase, and then uses the torch to start the flame in the arena. The climactic transfer of the Olympic flame from the final torch to the cauldron at the central host stadium marks the symbolic commencement of the Games. As with being the final runner of the Olympic torch relay, it is considered to be a great honor to light the Olympic cauldron, and similarly it has become a tradition to select notable athletes to conduct this part of the ceremony. After being lit, the flame in the Olympic cauldron continues to burn throughout the Games, until the day of the closing ceremony and celebration, when it is finally put out, symbolizing the official end of the Games. Notable cauldron ceremonies. The first well-known athlete to light the cauldron in the stadium was nine-fold Olympic champion Paavo Nurmi, who excited the home crowd in Helsinki in 1952. In 1968, Enriqueta Basilio became the first woman to light the Olympic cauldron at the Olympic Games in Mexico City. Perhaps one of the most spectacular of Olympic cauldron lighting ceremonies took place at the 1992 Summer Olympics, when Paralympic archer Antonio Rebolo lit the cauldron by shooting a burning arrow over it, which ignited gas rising from the cauldron. Unofficial videos seem to indicate that the flame was lit from below. 20 years after the Barcelona Games, one of those involved said that the flame was switched on. 2 years later, the Olympic fire was brought into the stadium of Lillehammer by a ski jumper. In Beijing 2008, Li Ning ran on air around the bird's nest and lit the flame. In Vancouver 2010, 4 athletes, Katrina Lemaidon, Wayne Gretzky, Steve Nash, and Nancy Green, were given the honor of lighting the flame simultaneously indoors before Wayne Gretzky transferred the flame to an outdoor cauldron at Vancouver's waterfront. Other famous last bearers of the torch include heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali, Australian Aboriginal runner Kathy Freeman, Brazilian marathon runner Vanderlei de Lima, and South Korean figure skater Yoona Kim. On other occasions, the people who lit the cauldron in the stadium are not famous, but nevertheless symbolize Olympic ideals. Japanese runner Yoshinori Saki was born in Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945, the day the nuclear weapon Little Boy destroyed that city. He symbolized the rebirth of Japan after the Second World War when he opened the 1964 Tokyo Games. At the 1976 Games in Montreal, 2 teenagers, one from the French-speaking part of the country, one from the English-speaking part, symbolized the unity of Canada. At the 2012 Games in London, the torch was carried by Sir Stephen Redgrave to a group of 7 young British athletes, each nominated by a British Olympic champion, who then each lit a single tiny flame on the ground, igniting 204 copper petals before they converged to form the cauldron for the Games. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?